So I got it. So we are recording for the record. And now I will share my screen again. Yeah, they said there's more space on this one.
That was why I wanted to do it there.
All right. False start, but now we got the start going. Okay, so city staff will be recording and taking comments down. Our consultants will be providing the information and framing the choices that we have to make on the docs. Our stakeholders are people who represent an organization that has an interest in these docs that we've identified through our public involvement plan. And we're hoping the stakeholders have the chance to, at this meeting, provide a range of perspectives. And then there will also be individual participants who join us at this meeting who will add their perspectives and observe and listen to the stakeholders. And we'll have as the meeting progresses, we'll have more of a free exchange. But the idea is to let the stakeholders, whose time is often very overcommitted, a chance to weigh in first. So that's the idea of having these two different distinctions between participants. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the city staff and the consultants, and then I'm going to ask people from different categories of participants to introduce themselves. So for city staff, I'm Paul West. I'm the Parks and Recreation Capital Projects and Planning Manager. We also have Andrea Larson, who's a Senior Administrative Assistant, and Sarah Bluvis, who's our Small Business Liaison. For our consultants from KPFF, we have Andy Bennett, who is a principal and the project lead, and also Bob Riley, who's a principal as well. And then from Anchor QEA, we have Peter Hummel, a principal there, and Josh Jensen, who's an environmental planner with a specialty in permitting. From Blue Coast Engineering, we have Kathy Kedridge, who's the principal of that firm. So I'd like now for the Department of Natural Resources staff to introduce themselves. So anybody from Natural Resources? I'm not hearing anybody.
Okay, so it would help if I unmuted myself. Hi, I'm Lelania Amiat. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources in the Aquatics Division. My role in the Aquatics Division is to supervise the unit that does the stewardship reviews. Our language at the DNR is stewardship. It's also biological reviews. So we're ensuring that there's environmental protection wrapped into the aquatic lands lease. And then Joe Miles is also with us, and introduce yourself, Joe. Thank you for inviting us.
Sure.
Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Joe.
There we go. Sorry. Now can you hear me?
Yep. Just you're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Okay. I'll try to get closer to the microphone. Otherwise, I can switch to my phone. So I'm Joe Miles. I'm a district manager with the Department of Natural Resources in the Aquatics Division, and I cover the King County area of aquatic lands. And Trina Contreras is the land manager for this part of Washington. And unfortunately, as many of you know, DNR also participates in the wildfire program, and she was called out to a fire this week. So I'm her supervisor, and I'll be attending on her behalf. But thank you so much to the City of Mercer Island for hosting this meeting. We're glad to participate.
Thank you. All right. Do we have, I was expecting some city council members to join us. Do we have city council members to introduce? I didn't see any come online, so I don't know if any have showed up yet.
I don't see any in the participants list.
Okay, thank you. Parks and Recreation Commission members, would you introduce yourselves?
This is Rory Westberg. I'm a member of the Mercer Island Parks and Recreation Commission.
Next, my name is Lynn Gualtieri, and I'm a Mercer Island resident. I live very close to Luther Burbank and frequent those docks a lot in my paddleboard, so I have that perspective, swimming and all that, paddleboard boating stuff. And then I also teach environmental science at Seattle University.
Great, thank you. Okay. And I did see Don Cohen. I don't know if he's still on, but okay, well, we'll move on. Arts Council. I believe Eric Gordon is on.
Eric, you're on mute if you.
Tell them where the mute button is. It's lower left-hand corner.
You can also press the space bar to temporarily unmute yourself. That's a Zoom trick. No, not happening. Okay, let's move on. Our representative from YFS Foundation was not able to make it. So now I'm going to just open it up to the other organizations that are on here on this meeting. Anybody from boating community, nonprofits, business community, please just unmute yourself and introduce yourself briefly. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Ann Cruz, and I'm with the Seattle Sea Kayak Club.
Great.
And my name is Shannon Leversedge, representing rowing, the sport of rowing, along with Tyler Simpson, who's on this call as well. That's what we're representing today.
Great.
Hi, everyone. My name's Tim. I'm with Outdoors for All Foundation. We provide outdoor recreation for people with disabilities. So interested in the accessibility component today. I also have a personal physical disability as well. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you all.
My name is John Scherzo. I'm representing the Chamber of Commerce. I've lived on the island for 40 years and have a business here for the past 25. And my background is finance and general management.
Great, thank you.
My name is Don Charrette. I run Seattle Adventure Sports. We're a summer camp partner of Mercer Island Parks and Rec, specifically paddle sports and paddle camps. So we have an interest in having some accessibility on the docks. Yeah, I really appreciate the invitation, Paul. Thank you very much.
Sure. Anybody else? I also noticed that Elaine Summergren, who's our Parks Operation Manager, and Kittner, who is our Public Works Director, just joined us. Sue, I haven't heard from you yet. Ah.
Muted.
She is unmuting. There you go. Something's not working.
Can't hear you.
Yeah.
She's muted.
She's not, well, she wasn't.
She's off and on.
Hello, Gary Loom. Gary Loom, Washington Kayak Club. I'm the conservation chair there.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Don, do you want to introduce yourself?
Bye, John. Sorry, Don Cohen. I've had problems. Thank you, Paul. Sorry, I'm a member of the Parks and Rec Commission.
Great.
Thank you. Sorry.
And Sue, you sound like you're had a dose of helium.
Hey, Sue.
Sue, we can't hear you. It's just coming through as garbled,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Okay. So Sue, you know what? Sue, you have special permission to use chat as a way to communicate with us. So if that works for you. Anyway, we're gonna move on here. I'm gonna talk about where we are in the process. The list on the left is what we hope to cover this fall, and the list on the right is the timeline overall for the project. So we've completed scoping and contracting. Our consultant, KPFF, has done condition assessments with geotechnical conditions and dock inspection. And they've also done survey work at the waterfront. And so that brings us to our public input part of this process, which starts with the design charrette, and then the consultants and the design team will develop a set of design alternatives that we'll present to the public at an online open house toward the end of August. When we get input from that open house, we will then use that to develop a preferred alternative, which will involve the Parks and Recreation Commission, hopefully, if we're able to start meeting again in this fall. And then finally, a recommendation will be council probably by somebody. Sue, yeah, why don't you stay muted, because that is not, I think that's, yeah, not working. Okay, so that's the process we're planning to go through. The goal of this design charrette and this whole process this fall is to develop a concept plan for the waterfront that centers around small boat recreation. So for tonight, we want to understand the technical issues. We want to share ideas from different perspectives. We want to consider the range of opinions that people express and give the design team constructive feedback. Tonight, we're going to go through 4 focus areas: the floating docks, the breakwater, accessibility, and placemaking. And for each of these focus areas, we're going to follow 5 steps. The consultant will present issues. While the consultant is presenting issues, we hope that participants will all type their questions into the chat. And then Sarah will batch those questions and ask them of the consultant after their presentation. And then we'll open it up to the stakeholders for initial impressions. If there's anybody who's an individual participant, we'll include them after stakeholders have had a chance to comment. And then we'll do some polling and get some reactions to the polling at the end of that process. So we'll go through those 5 steps for all 4 focus areas. The ground rules for the meeting are the same as the code of conduct for city council. We just want to be respectful of each other, take our turn, not take too much time. We're going to ask that you use the Zoom raise hand function when you want to speak, and that you can find that if you click on the participants button at the bottom of your screen. At the bottom of the participants window, you'll see a raise hand function. We're also asking everybody to mute and unmute yourselves when you want to talk or when you're called on. If you're not going to be participating for a while, it may make sense to turn your video off, which saves bandwidth. And finally, the other thing that will make this meeting go really well is if you hear somebody else state your same opinion, you don't need to restate it. Sarah is notes of comments of the meeting, and every comment that's stated will be recorded both by the meeting recording and in written form. So you don't need to keep restating an opinion that's already been stated. That will become part of the project record and the consultants will take it under consideration. We realize this is going to be a long meeting, so here's some tips for a good meeting. Focus on the topics that are of interest to you. You don't have to keep the focus for all 4 hours. If you want to step away briefly, that's okay. You know, we understand that you may not be able to sit for 4 hours. I certainly can't. We will take a break in the middle, so that's the good news. Step back and look at the big picture periodically. We're going to talk about some details, but it's also the big picture is where the ultimate goal is. We ask you to use the chat function to put your questions into the queue. The chat function, again, is one of those buttons at the bottom of your screen. You can open up chat and type in your question. But if you want to comment, we're asking you to do that personally by raising your hand and speaking. This is the first time we've done a meeting like this with Zoom. We've had several city council meetings and 2 board and commission meetings, but those have been through parliamentary procedure. And this is the first time we've had a more open public meeting with a more informal format. So this is an experiment. We're trying things. Be patient if the technology is not quite up to speed or the people who are running the meeting don't quite have it all together. And if you don't feel like you got to express your opinion tonight, there's Let's Talk, which is the project page for this project. Let's Talk is a great place to put comments or ask questions. That's going to be the place where all the comments from tonight get posted. If you have a thought this weekend or sometime next month about the project, go to Let's Talk and post it there. That's going to be the place to look for updates on the project as well. So I'm going to briefly give an overview of the project. The Luther Burbank Park Master Plan provides the concept for this project. That plan gives the vision of this waterfront as a place for small boats, paddlecraft, and shoreline access. That plan was the result of 2 years of public process. It resulted in a master plan that the council adopted. We want to be consistent with the master plan when we do this project. During that process, many things were considered, like a restaurant or having the marina be overnight moorage. Those things never made it into the plan. So if you have ideas that are bigger or different than, you know, a small boat-based facility that offers day moorage for, you know, larger boats as well, but is focused on the small craft aspect. If you're looking for something different than that, this is probably not the forum to vet that idea. That would probably be a Parks and Rec Commission idea or a city council comment. But the master plan calls for the boathouse to be created in the boiler building, where boats would be stored, rentals would be out of the boathouse, camps and classes would be out of the boathouse, and the docks would be a place for boats to launch, as well as the beach next to the waterfront plaza. There would be floating docks for small power boats and fixed pier for the larger power boats. And fixed piers would also function for fishing and sunbathing the way they do now. So that's the summary of the master plan. Here's the 4 project areas that we will be looking at tonight. The outline in blue is the south piers that were going to be converted to floating docks. The red outline is the north pier that will be renovated and retained as it is. The orange outline is the area of shoreline and access improvements and also the placemaking improvements, which includes the docks to some degree. And then the green outline is the boiler building, which is not actually part of this project, but is a separate project that we're tracking in a separate time frame. We actually have done a feasibility study for that and have a schematic scope of work to renovate that building. There are a number of project limitations that I just want to briefly cover. Of course, we have the limitation of the physical site, the topography, the aging infrastructure there. The 1928 boiler building and the docks were built in 1974. The environmental limitations are pretty significant. We have a highly regulated environment, and this is on leased aquatic shorelands that are owned by DNR. So we are not the owners. The city is not the owner of this site. This is leased to the city by DNR for public access. DNR has to have buy-in to everything that we do here. Then there's the financial aspect, which is always a limiting factor on anything like this. Waterfront construction is extremely expensive. Our initial scoping work indicated that this project may be upwards of $3 million in cost. Right now, the money that we have to work on this plan are our Parks Operations Levy, which expires in 2023, and the grant we have from the Recreation and Conservation Office. I just want to give you an idea of the other grants that we know that are available from the state. They're mostly geared toward boating and waterfront access. The grant limits are typically around $1 million, and getting that $1 million is a lot of work. It's not a guaranteed thing, so you can see there's a limit to what we can do. And at the same time, the city is in a financial crisis, and a big capital project is really not in the cards given the city's budget either. So putting together the finance package for this is going to be some collaborative effort between the city, the state, and other entities. So with that, I've now kind of given the overview of what we're covering tonight, and I'd like to turn it over. I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Andy Bennett, who will walk us through the first issue area, which is the docks.
So this is just an aerial view of the docks. Everyone's familiar with that. And this is what we have now. The project is to replace this portion of the fixed docks with floating docks to improve access for small boats, variously defined. One of the constraints we have, and this relates to getting it permitted, is the overwater coverage, or just the area of the new docks really can't be any bigger than the docks that we're taking out. And that's to, to manage the environmental impacts of the dock. But it's something that we'll have to keep track of as we're playing with the sizes and shapes of the various docks. And as Paul mentioned, the master plan calls for the northern pier to continue to be prioritized for larger boats and passive uses such as fishing and sunbathing. So we're not really planning to reconfigure that, although we are planning to make some improvements and some repairs so that extend the life of that dock and the benefits that are obtained from that facility.
Andy, you're muted.
Muted.
The problem is I was using my spacebar to unmute, and when I was in my slideshow, the spacebar also automatically advanced all of the slides. So let me try again. Now I can't get to my slideshow. I can't even get to the, all right, so where's the Zoom meeting? I'm working on getting back to the Zoom meeting so that I can share my slides. And it seems to have disappeared from my screen. I'm getting rid of other windows here so I can.
Yeah, I can.
Andy, we can see your PowerPoint.
Can you see, do you see PowerPoint in presenter view, or do you see just the PowerPoint as though I'm editing slides?
PowerPoint as if you're editing slides.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
See your.
So let me switch that. So now you should see a slide.
Correct.
Okay. Back to where I was. So we talked about the overview of the project and kind of the configuration that we have now. I don't know if anybody watched kind of the backgrounder videos that we prepared for this, but the main thing we're doing is we're replacing the fixed pier with floating docks. And anyone who's visited the fixed piers, or any of the fixed piers on Lake Washington, when the lake level is low, know that they're hard to get in and out of your boat. Whereas when we have the floating docks, it's a constant freeboard, so it's always accessible to whatever freeboard it's designed for. So that in itself will make an improvement to the facility. Another thing with floating docks is we can vary the freeboard to accommodate different sizes of boats. And this is something that we'll want to talk to you, the stakeholders, about is, what size boats do we really want to accommodate, and what ratios or what priorities. But we can design the floats to best suit specific types of vessels. One thing on the accessibility front, there is a requirement that the gangway have a maximum slope of 12:1. And so at low water, we'll make sure the gangways are long enough that we don't exceed that slope. And therefore we keep all the new floats accessible. And at high water, it becomes a moot point, or we may even have a gangway that slopes upward slightly. But regardless, we can't exceed that 12:1 slope. We'll also use an open grating as much as we can to let sunlight through, which improves the habitat on the seafloor in the area of the docks. So with that, I'll just go through some alternatives that we could consider for the new floats. And this shows both a breakwater and new docks for small boats, kayaks, small sailboats, what have you. And one alternative would be to put the breakwater, which is in dark blue, as far offshore as possible, which creates a relatively large basin and separates any of the vessels that might, motorboats primarily, that would land at that breakwater from the small boats, which would be the hand-powered craft, which would be in here closer to shore. And I'm showing fingers here for the small boats, which is also an option that we may or may not want to use. Another configuration option, and again, keeping this North Pier, more of it open to passive uses that have been talked about. We could provide access to a floating breakwater with fingers closer in. This makes it such that the motorboats accessing these fingers, accessing the dual-use breakwater and mooring float, are closer to the hand-powered craft or the sailboats that might be using this other float closer to shore. Or we could leave the North Pier entirely alone and bring things in a little bit even closer to shore, which makes access to the breakwater easier. It's closer distance. In this configuration, I've shown just a single pier would be a relatively low pier for those smaller boats, such as, like I said, the small sailboats or hand-powered craft. We could go with fingers. Maybe we don't need fingers. The kayak could launch somewhere else. this is just to give you an idea of the range of options and some of the pieces that we're going to play with as we go through and try to figure out what the facility really needs to look like to best serve the needs of the stakeholders, all the stakeholders. There will be some compromises. We can't achieve everything. And I think we've got some questions that we'll be asking to get specific feedback. But for now, that's the basic overview of what we're looking at and what we're considering and what we have to think about in terms of how we arrange the docks for the various uses. And I think I'll hand it back to Paul now. Do you want me to leave this screen up, Paul, or do you have some other slides to show?
No, that's good. Why don't you leave that up?
Okay.
So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. We have one from Rory. Sarah, do you want to ask?
Sure. So Rory Westberg has asked, will the deck of the North Pier be replaced with open grading?
At this point, we do not plan to replace the deck of the North Pier. It's if we're going to replace the deck, we would almost be replacing the entire pier. The inspection work that we've done shows that it's actually got most of the components of that North Pier have a good service life remaining. There are some repairs needed, but generally speaking, we intend to leave the primary structure, that concrete deck, alone.
Okay.
Okay, we've got another comment, it looks like, regarding freeboard height. And Tyler, the raise your hand feature is if you click on the participants button, you should have the option to raise your hand. So let you do that, and then we can have you find that. We'll move on. We've got a question from Dawn. Is it possible to have fingers for human-powered craft? Thinking about accessibility and stability for all users of all abilities, is it possible to have those on the shore side of the lower freeboard, the green pier?
Yes. Yeah, that's an option I did not show, but it is certainly viable options to have fingers on the water side of that green pier, and we can make them whatever freeboard is appropriate. So I've worked on other projects where we have had finger slips for kayak launches, and we've got some good lessons learned, some good design criteria, if that's the way we want to go.
Looks like Tyler has a comment. He has his hand raised.
Okay.
Hi, yeah, just a quick comment on freeboard. So for the sport of rowing, any rowing shells, the freeboard on the dock,
Join the meeting.
Typically 5 to 5.5 inches. The reason being that there's riggers, like metal riggers or carbon fiber riggers on a rowing shell that hang over the dock.
Right.
So the freeboard needs to be lower than some other personal or man-powered watercraft.
Right. Yeah, and I've actually also worked on some floats for other rowing clubs, and so if that was the preferred use for the very low freeboard, we would certainly design them to accommodate that.
Great. Thanks.
It looks like we've got another just comment in the chat, so maybe this might spark some more conversation. It says, rowing and adaptable rowing safety should have motorcraft boats launching separately and further away from motor boats to help with launching.
So would that be, this configuration would address that and provide as much separation as possible between the motorboat uses, which would be out here, and the human-powered craft, which would be here. So that's something we definitely want some feedback on, is how important is that separation.
And we've
definitely brings the two types of vessels closer together.
Great. We've got another question related to water depths. What are the water depths at the inner dock and outside breakwater?
We did have a bathymetric survey done, and I got some preliminary data from that, but I can't remember. Bob, do you remember how deep it is from the survey work that we got in offshore?
You know, Andy, unfortunately, I don't remember.
I think it's 30 to 40 feet out at the offshore end. And then I think in this area where the small craft float would likely be, I think it's still on the order of 8 to 10 feet. So it drops off pretty quick. I believe it's a fairly steep, the mud line drops off pretty quick in there.
Not seeing any more questions, although we have an agreement thinking about separating the motorcraft and the smaller boats from launching. But no other questions in the chat right now.
Okay, would anybody, I guess I want to just open this up to commenting. We've had a few comments already, and again, the chat, I prefer not to have comments in the chat. I prefer people to address their comments personally to the entire group. So if you want to comment, raise your hand, and Andrea will call on you.
Don Cohen has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm not being successful on getting my written thing, so I'm raising my hand. I'm concerned about how these different configurations impact fishing, because I'm talking about fishing with your grandkids, kids, and so forth, and it's going to be decreased by at least half here. And the breakwater concept provides even more limitations, like it does at Groveland, where you can't fish anymore.
I think if we end up with a configuration like this, or if we provide access to the new floats from that first hexagon, I don't think that would impact fishing from this north pier. And like I said, that's part of the feedback we want is how important is that preservation of that fishing access. The different options definitely put more and less traffic out on the fishing pier. But we can protect the fishing, at least from the northern pier, with a configuration that looks like the one that you can see now.
Hey, Don, could you elaborate on what you mean by the breakwater would be cutting off the access for fishing?
Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure how the breakwater would work here, but if you go to Groveland, where you used to be able to cast out anywhere west, you can't do that anymore because of whatever that structure is there that I assume is a breakwater kind of structure. And I'd be interested in somebody like CJ on the park staff. He's got a lot of knowledge, maybe some of you do too, about where the quote best fishing is. And this is bringing it in. You got big boats all on the, emphasized on the north side of the North Pier. And he always tells me, cast out as far as you can. And sometimes we cast over, if we're on the North Pier, we cast toward the South Pier and vice versa and everything. So again, I'm not saying that that's the only thing to keep in mind, because watercraft are important to a lot of people, but there are a lot of people, myself included, who use that for fishing with family, kids, etc., grandkids.
Then looks like Shannon has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to speak for probably a lot of the small craft boats. Obviously, small craft boats are hard to see in the water on the best of days. And so, again, just making that comment about safety being separated, if any the biggest distance, I guess, between the two would be great. The other comment I had was just small craft boats usually follow a flow pattern when launching and coming back into the docks, and which is even more important on days where the weather isn't as great, and to just avoid any pattern flow that motor craft would be coming in on. And also just within the small craft boats, there can be collisions between them. So just making sure that we have that in mind. And the only other question I had was the wind pattern. I'm not particularly sure of where the winds usually, what direction they come from, but just to keep that in mind with launching small craft boats, it's harder to obviously launch in oncoming winds. So just keeping that piece in mind as well.
And then looks like we have Don Chayette.
Yeah. So I am a little bit curious about what the shoreline configuration is. I'm not sure if that's quite the scope of this conversation, but I know there's been talk about adding some sort of beach material in front of the boathouse and sort of to the north end of that little, I don't know, bulbous protrusion there. Is that something that anybody can speak to today, or is that for a later date to talk about?
I think we are looking at some improvements to make the beach to the north of the boiler building more accessible, and to possibly better integrate that beach into the boating uses of the plaza and the boiler building area, and make that accessible. In terms of bringing in additional beach material, I did notice that in the master plan sketch configuration that it does look like this area has some fill and actually has maybe a little bit of a beach built up. I don't think that's on the table, but Paul, can you confirm that, or is that something?
I can speak to that a little bit, Andy. Yeah, this is Peter Hummel from Anchor QEA. And I will be talking about that beach to the north a little bit in terms of access. And like Andy said, the access to it is certainly on the table. In terms of adding beach material, yeah, just to second what Andy said, I don't see that being a real focus of this project. The city, we've been working with the city on that for the area south of the plaza in the past, starting about 7 years ago. And that does not look like it's going to happen anytime soon. So there's a lot of permitting issues, and it was originally being conceived because of an interest in getting grants for salmon habitat enhancement, and the people that give out those grants didn't really see a lot of benefit because that shoreline is so natural now. And so I don't envision that or the area immediately in front of the plaza changing in the near future. But the beach just to the north, we'll talk about more later tonight.
I'm going to say we have about, we have a couple more minutes for comments, and then I'd like to launch a poll. So anybody else who would like to comment? We got a little bit of a late start, so we can run over a little bit. I'm trying to end this section a little after 6. So, don't hold back. If you have comments, please come forward with them. But we're going to try to stick to our agenda schedule.
Hey, Paul, this is Suzanne. I'm having a hard time with my Zoom, but can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I guess Andy used the term dual use breakwater, and the other gentleman mentioned the breakwater down at Groveland. I mean, we're not talking about something like those big barrels down at Groveland. We're hopefully talking about some kind of breakwater that's functional that people can either walk on or tie up to or something like that, right?
Yes, that's the intent, is that the floating breakwater will also be a dock that small craft can tie up to. Think, yeah, in this configuration, it's vessels would tie up alongside it, but it would still be accessible, and there'd be mooring hardware for boats to tie up alongside it. We just don't have the space to have something, a breakwater that's separate. Really, we need to get the most out of it, so it'll be a structure that is both a mooring facility and a breakwater. And Kathy's actually going to talk a little bit about the design of the breakwater in the next section.
Thanks.
Anybody else would like to comment?
And I'm not seeing any new comments or questions in the chat either, Paul.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. There's several questions in this poll, so it's going to take about 5 minutes or so for everybody to answer. So take your time, and I think some of the answers, you know, some of the questions cover topics we've discussed. So let's try this and see where we go. So everybody should start to see the polls show up. There are 4 questions to this poll, and I have 12 of 22. I'm assuming, I'm going to assume, I should say explicitly that city staff and consultants are not answering this poll, so that eliminates a number of us. We're probably close to being done here if 13 of 22 voted. Okay, we're going to wrap up voting here. 14, another 30 seconds or so. All right, I'm going to move to end polling. So last answers. Going. Okay, end polling. I'm going to share results here.
And Paul, Mr. Shearzo has his hand raised.
Ah,
I just had a quick question. Has anybody talked to the people at Coulon Park to see what their experience is between the finger piers and the boat slots?
I've not talked to Coulon Park. I've talked to Kirkland. They have the same situation as well.
Okay, good. So we've got that sense of experience.
Yeah, and it merits some more conversation. It is interesting. The linear moorage tends to get bigger boats, and the finger piers tend to get smaller boats. I would say that's a general rule. All right, so let's see what we got. Looks like greater separation is pretty much the consensus. We're pretty split on whether finger docks or longer single dock work better. There's a slight bias towards coexisting, boating and fishing and sunbathing coexisting with sunbathing as the priority. And kayaks and paddleboards should have both options. Looks like a majority vote. Okay, that's useful information. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing the results unless anybody wants to see them for longer. These will become a part of the project record. That. All right. So we're a little ahead of schedule here, which is good. I'm going to go ahead and ask Kathy Kettridge to talk about breakwaters. Oh, and you're muted, Kathy. The curse of Zoom.
I know. Can everybody hear me now? Does that work? Great. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. Hold on. Then just going to ask for, can you see the screen, Paul?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about some design considerations for the floating breakwater component of the project specifically. I've made a few notes based on questions people asked. I'll try to answer them as I go through. And obviously, if there's other questions after I'm done, I'm happy to answer those as well. So to start, I want to talk about the wave conditions specific to the site. Over here is a navigation chart, and the park is approximately here. This site is going to be subject to wind waves from primarily two directions. I believe it was Sharon who was asking about a predominant wind direction. On the right over here is a windrose that sort of illustrates that. For those who aren't familiar with windroses, the length of these little pie slices is how often the wind comes from that direction, and the color is how strong the wind is, and red is stronger wind speeds. So generally in this area we have winds that come primarily from the northeast and southeast, and not so much from due east. So we're going to experience, storm waves in the winter, from sort of the northeast direction shown where this green arrow is, and from a southeast direction where this aqua arrow is. And then in addition, as I'm sure all of you are familiar, there's a large amount of boat traffic, a lot of it high speed, that traverses, offshore the site. And because of those boats, they throw off wakes. Some of them are quite large. The wakes themselves are probably a bit bigger than the storm waves. And primarily, they're going to be coming into the site kind of more dead on from the east or close to east, sort of in the direction of this orange arrow. I'm just going to talk really quickly about how floating breakwaters work. They work a little differently than a breakwater or a structure that would go all the way to the seabed. So the first thing that's different is they do let some wave energy, some waves through the structure. How much wave energy or waves get through the structure depends on a lot of things. The size of the floating breakwater itself, the water depth that you're in, where the breakwater is located, as well as the wave conditions themselves. So these photos sort of illustrate maybe a little bit of the extremes, but I think illustrate the point well. So on the right, this is a floating breakwater unit that does act also as a dock. For small choppy waves, floating breakwaters work very well, and you can see how calm the water is on the landward side of the structure. For larger waves or waves that are longer in wavelength, the structure will let more wave energy through. The picture on the left here is actually from San Francisco Bay, so it's not necessarily representative of Lake Washington, but I think it illustrates on the point that as the waves get larger, especially some of those really large boat wakes, some of that wave energy will get in to the basin and impact floats and users. It won't necessarily look as calm as it does over here on the right side for those larger waves. The other thing I'd like to talk about in terms of how floating breakwaters work is, and I think this photo over here illustrates it better than a drawing, so I'm just going to walk folks through it. So when waves come into the floating breakwater, which is what the structure is right here, it stops a lot of the wave energy, and there's a shadow zone approximately where this orange outline is, and you can see that the water is a lot calmer in this area. And that's shadow zone can be defined. It's a finite amount of area, and how big that shadow zone is depends on how long the breakwater is, and also the type of breakwater it is, how big it is itself. But what also happens if the waves are going to bend around or diffract around the ends of this structure, and they sort of reform, for lack of a better word, landward of the structure some distance away. And you can kind of see that there are waves closer to the shoreline in this photo. And so the calmest water, therefore, is going to be found directly behind the structure itself. So as you move the breakwater closer to shore, that shadow zone will also move closer to shore. And as you move it farther away from shore, it will move farther offshore. So that's going to be part of the design considerations, is not just how much wave energy do you want the structure to knock down, but also how big of an area and where do you want this shadow zone area to be for the best use of the park. And then finally, if the structure were close enough to the shoreline that the shadow zone extended into the shoreline, it can also provide some protection from shoreline erosion over the long term. And then one more thing before I open it up for questions. I've spoken about most of the things over here, but in this green circle, there are some good opportunities that afford using a floating breakwater. First, they're easier to construct, obviously, in deeper water, which we do have at this site. You can configure them in a multitude of ways to optimize their performance. So you can meet the needs of the project and also meet multiple needs of a project. And like I said before, depending on how you orient it and where you put it, in addition to providing some wave protection for uses and boating at the site, you can also get another purpose to assist with shoreline erosion as well. So that's all I have formally prepared. I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. I've got one question in the chat so far from Don Cohen, again, talking about decreased fishing use or concern. Can floating breakwaters be used for fishing or sunbathing?
Yes, they can. There's a lot of units. I'll just show some photos again. Floating breakwaters come in all different types. There's everything from the unit that I know everyone's familiar with at Groveland Park, to units that look essentially like concrete docks, and you wouldn't really know it was a floating attenuator if you didn't look underneath of it. So you can certainly use them, and I've seen them used for fishing, docking, all sorts of small or large vessels. So depending on the unit selected, and Andy can provide any more detail, you certainly can use that for any of those uses.
Great. We've got another question. Will the breakwater incorporate grading? And if so, how much?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, you can, I have seen floating breakwaters that use grading. I don't know from a structural perspective how difficult that is to incorporate it into one that's also used as a dock. I've usually seen those used when it didn't need to be used as a dock. But Andy, I think perhaps I might defer that to you if you have more information on that one.
Yeah, we may be able to use grading for the dock because we've used open grading for other docks, and so the use doesn't preclude it. The challenge is that the breakwater, in order to absorb the wave energy, needs to be a fairly solid structure. And so if you have grading on top of a solid structure, the light doesn't get through the solid structure, even though it does get through the grading, and so you lose the benefit of the grading. And so in cases like that, it may be easier not to have the grading and just make the structure itself the walking surface. So if there's an opportunity, if it's open beneath the grading, we may be able to do that. But it depends on how much energy we're trying to do in other aspects of the design. But it's an option. It just doesn't work very well if the breakwater itself is solid.
Yeah, Andy, I would chime in and just say that the ideal structure for the breakwater is going to be a concrete dock, and it would not have grading. But part of that is going to be based on what the permitting agencies will allow. What we've seen is a lot of times you can't install docks without grading, but that will structurally make that very difficult to make work if it has grading.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. I'm gonna go to this one first from Joe Miles. How will the breakwater and floats be anchored?
Yeah, I believe they'll be pile supported. I think that's the plan. Is that correct, Andy?
That's probably the way to go. We've done some other projects where we've used what's called a C-flex anchor, which is actually more of a mooring line that would be configured in an X arrangement. But most breakwaters are held in place with guide piles, as you can see in the photos that Kathy has up right now. But we can consider other options.
And some of that might come down to cost and also sort of aesthetics. So there's probably a trade-off there.
Great. Okay, we've got another question in the chat. Is there a significant seasonal difference in the wind patterns and velocity? Wondering which season's data we're using. They're assuming higher winds in the winter, but increased boat usage in the summer, creating wakes and waves. And then also thinking about this in terms of coastal erosion.
Yeah, so the wind data here is over 20 years combined together. And there is definitely seasonal patterns, so stronger winds certainly occur in the winter and not in the summer. And so we are anticipating that storm waves would be occurring mostly in the winter. And, you know, from a coastal engineering perspective, I think of that as survivability of those structures that are there. Because storm waves, they might be a little smaller than the wake heights. Storms last for a very long time, so you're going to have waves of a certain height for, you know, days perhaps at a time or hours at a time. For summer, we're anticipating that there's going to be boat wakes will be the dominant wave condition that the breakwater would have to deal with, and so wind storms would not be such a concern in the winter. In the summer. And in terms of coastal erosion, we would obviously have to look again at both conditions. I've seen sites where just depending on the wind conditions versus the wake conditions, both can be equally erosive. Storms tend to be more erosive than boat wakes only because, again, they last for a very long time, and duration of storm does have a direct impact on how much coastal erosion occurs. So I guess the short answer is we'll be looking at both of them, and there is indeed a seasonal pattern of winds that we will be considering. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thanks, Kathy. We've got another question. If the breakwater incorporates piling, what type of piles will be used? Will they be steel or something else?
Kathy, you want me to take that?
Sure. Good.
There's usually, 4 different types of piles we look at. There's timber, steel, concrete, and then some sort of composite material, which is like almost like a plastic resin. Each have their advantages and disadvantages. Timber piles really aren't used anymore just because you can't treat them. The chemicals required to treat them are not environmentally friendly. So we tend to look at other materials. Steel certainly work pretty well. They're generally fairly economical. Concrete is another option. And then, and we'd probably just look at the 2 options and see what makes the most sense at this site. Concrete tends to be more durable and it lasts longer. It's not as subject to corrosion as steel is. And then lastly, we could look at a composite pile. Those tend to be more expensive. And it depends on the soil conditions as far as whether they are drivable in the soils. If we have really dense soils, they don't tend to work as well. So those are the kinds of options we'll be looking at.
Great. How about, will the floats and breakwaters be illuminated at night?
I'm not sure if that's allowed. Is it, Paul? Do you know? Is there any restrictions on lighting on the docks?
I don't know exactly. At Groveland, I think we were required to put some kind of beacon on the around the breakwater there. We have flashing lights or some kind of obstruction light that's moored off the breakwater. So I don't know if that was a regulatory requirement, but I assume it was. Elaine Summergren is on this call, I think, and she may be able to answer. Elaine, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So I don't believe that it was a regulatory requirement, but it was advisable because the floating breakwaters there are black and would not be easily seen at night. And each of the buoys that are placed off of that floating breakwater have solar powered little beacon lights on the top of them. They were integrated into those buoys.
And I wonder, is the question about safety and navigation lights, which it sounds like is the issue at Groveland Park, where there are warning buoys so anybody that's boating at night won't run into them? Or is the question about, will there be, lights like street light kind of lights to allow use at night? I'm not sure if
Joe actually just clarified. He says he's thinking about pedestrian use at night.
Okay.
And it sounds like we have a comment that DNR would require lighting that is directional on the decks for ADA.
Yeah, so it would be what we've done in other places where we've had lighting facilities like this is it's a low level lighting. It's not up on a tall masthead like a parking lot. It's more of a bollard, and it is focused just on the walking surface to make it safe for pedestrians with minimum spillage, which affects fish. and has other habitat impacts.
I'm not seeing any more questions or comments in the chat just yet. So I don't know if you want to open it up again, Paul, for just general comments.
Yeah, go ahead. And I think this is a time for people to express their opinion here.
Hey, Paul, this is Salim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I don't have a real question about the presentation. I just jumped on because I received a call from somebody that said they were having a hard time connecting. Is this going to be recorded and then posted somewhere that people that have missed the first hour can see it?
Yes, it is being recorded, and it will be posted like a city council meeting on Unicode. And we'll link that to the Let's Talk project page.
Perfect. Can you do me a favor and send me an email to the link when it's published, whenever that might be, and I'll forward it to that person?
Sure.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks, guys.
Don Charrette, Seattle Adventure Sports. I have a quick question, if that's okay.
Go for it.
I just as a comment, in Kathy's presentation, there was an alternative dock configuration that I thought was a happier alternative with fingers and direction and breakwater. I don't know if it's too soon in the planning process for that, but I that met some of my requests. So just throwing that out there.
All right, so that was option 4.
Okay.
There will be options 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. What in particular did you like about that?
I liked the separation between the breakwater and the small boat docks. I liked the continuation of the breakwater sort of coming back around to that southeast aspect. And I liked that the finger docks for small boats were on the inland side of it, creating space between the large boats and smaller boats.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Other comments? This is a time when we can you can just speak up at this point, I think, if you have a comment. Okay, I'm not hearing any.
There's another. Looks like, yeah, we've got a couple other questions. Will the new dock design alter the placement of the no wake buoys, and what determines where those are placed?
I can answer that. The no wake buoys are placed by Mercer Island Marine Patrol. They are the outer limit of our aquatic lease with DNR. And what's the second question? What's the last part of that question?
Just wondering if the dock design will alter that placement at all.
We can look at that, but I don't think so. They're pretty far out. I mean, the one off the docks is quite a ways away from the end of the south pier right now.
If they're set by the Marine Patrol at the edge of the property, we're not moving that, so we probably won't affect them. I would like to think we could do something to make them more effective, but I think that's outside our purview.
This is Peter Hummel. Andy, I would just throw in there that there may be opportunities to add other buoys for other purposes, such as defining for the for the portion of the docks that's to be used by non-motorized boats, you know, what are the limits of motorized boats as you get closer to shore, so that there's a safe route to those non-motorized docking areas defined.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We can use buoys within the facility to try to designate navigation lanes and keep the uses separate from each other.
Okay, sounds like comments are wrapping up. I don't want to rush this because this is a good discussion. Anybody else? Going?
Join the meeting.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and launch our second poll. So here we go. This is 2 questions, so it shouldn't take quite as long. And see where we go. Go ahead and take some time. This is for people who are not city staff or consultants.
Then we have another question, comment of will boats moor overnight? And they don't understand pedestrian use at night on the dock.
I'll just answer that there is no current plan to change the rule that the docks are for day moorage only, and they close at the same time that the park closes. And Marine Patrol monitors that. There is no plan to have overnight moorage. That's not part of the master plan. Okay, we have 10 out of 20 so far. Last time we got 14 respondents, so I'm going to wait another minute or 2. Okay, it seems like nobody else is voting. Everybody done? 15 seconds, and then I'll close the poll. Okay, I'm ending the poll now. Okay, and here are the results. So it looks like the opinion is that the boat wakes are a greater influence greater impact on dock users. And the small paddlecraft launching and retrieving is more affected by wave action on the docks. So pretty significant differences in, I mean, they're not close. Okay, everybody's seen that? So I'm going to stop sharing results. And this is a chance again to comment on the results of the polling or make any other comments you want on this section on the breakwaters before we go on a break. So any comments, wrap up that anybody wants to make? See, Rory had his hand up.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. How are you using, or how do you plan to use this polling information?
We don't really have a plan. It's just part of a way.
The record.
It's part of the record. It's part of a way to kind of get a snapshot of where we are at after the discussion. It's not necessarily a vote, but it does tell us where opinion lies. At least remember, this is the first of several discussions on this. There will be another poll based on the design alternatives that we present publicly at the end of the month. So there'll be several of these kind of poll sets of data that we can look at.
Okay, thanks. I was just curious because it's an interesting technique to kind of gauge immediate feedback.
Yeah. I appreciate everybody's participation and your patience with the technical difficulties. Like I said, this is the first meeting the city's run that is not based on Robert's Rules of Order, but more of a loose exchange of information and ideas. So with your help, it's going forward well so far. So I'm going to go ahead and say we should take a 15-minute break. And let's reconvene at 6:45. Please come back and be on at 6:45. And I will share my screen with the break screen. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Paul.
Paul, that looks like your PowerPoint. There you go.
Okay.
There you go. It's all yours. And I'm going to
So, Paul, did you just have one polling question on access?
Let me take a look.
Because I think we discussed two, and I noticed you did one of them in terms of the beach versus docks with kayaks and paddle boards already. So
We have three polling questions on accessibility.
okay, great. Can you just tell me the topics?
Yep. So one is the providing the safe access route from the north end of the plaza to the gravel beach.
Okay.
The second one is about creating a continuous access from the shoreline trails to the north and the south.
Okay.
The third is about the lake level and whether the accessible route should go to what levels should the accessible route go to? Should it go to the highest lake level only, or should it go to some intermediate level, or should it go to the lake at all lake levels?
Okay. That's great. All right.
Okay, it's 6:45. I think it's time to get rolling.
Okay. Would you like me to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, hello, I'm Peter Hummel with Anchor QEA. My role on this project is to provide the landscape architecture, and I'm going to start with talking about project site access, and then I'll do a second topic on placemaking after we're done with this, which is our last, and that will be our last topic. And so we want to look at access to this site from a number of different perspectives. One is how you get from the upper part of the park, kind of the main entrance, part down to the shoreline, access along the shoreline to this particular location that we're talking about, and then access for this particular project, the kinds of access connections that we want to make as part of this project, both to the water and, well, mainly to the water, but you know, to the water and adjacent shorelines. And so that's what we're going to cover here. So, so in terms of steep slope conditions, you know, that's a obvious issue that is constraining access from the main entrance to the park up above the shoreline. And this image here was taken from this location where this yellow arrow is kind of looking north. That's the park headquarters in the background, and whoops. And so those steep slopes on the map on the left are environmentally critical areas that the city regulates because of their steepness. And even though this is a paved route, it is not ADA accessible. On the other hand, we have a compacted gravel route along the north shoreline that appears to be, the grades at least are ADA accessible. And so, so we have kind of a combination of conditions there. And so that is one of the constraints. And so this is showing kind of all the opportunities and constraints regarding access. One of the constraints is the slope and the access from the main entrance. Another is the distance from this part of the site where we're dealing with to the parking. If someone were to bring their own boat, that's a considerable distance. And then some others are just the access to this beach to the north, and that right now, because of the slope just right along the shoreline, these orange lines are indicating the steep slopes, that access to this beach is not currently ADA accessible. So but there's also a number of opportunities, and I'll show you one for connecting this main entrance to the park to our site and making that ADA accessible. And then another opportunity is to connect all along the shoreline of the park and make that all ADA accessible, including our site. Other opportunities are to make these new docks ADA accessible both to the land and to the water. And so there's some really important opportunities for access as part of this this project and other future projects. And this is just an example of a project we designed on Mercer Island that's been built at Hawkins Landing Park, where we had no ADA access whatsoever within this Hawkins Landing Park, and we provided a route with switchbacks to get you at least as far as we could to this picnic viewing area. And maybe many of you have been to this park since it was rebuilt. And this is the kind of future scheme that's associated with renovating the boiler building. It's not part of this project that we're working on for the docks, but it's a future project that will, greatly expand the capacity of this site. And so this has a combination of 2 stairways leading down to the shoreline, and also this zigzagging ADA accessible route with going around the backside of the boiler building on the hillside down to this plaza, and ultimately the dock area. And then kind of zooming into our project and our site just a little bit more. again, this connection, some of the important connections that we want to hear about from all of you, the connection of this existing beach to the plaza and the rest of the shoreline in a way that's accessible to people with disabilities, and the connection right now of this path to the plaza. I think we've mostly solved that issue in past projects, but there's also another project in the works. We've been working with Paul and the city on to make this South Shoreline Trail all the way to the plaza ADA accessible toward most of the way to the swim beach. And then the other, as I mentioned, is the connection of the docks back to the plaza and from the docks to the water, and making those ADA access available in some capacity to the water itself. And so this last slide is just showing, in terms of connecting the plaza to this shoreline path, that we've got this, where these two connect. There's a little bit of an accessibility issue there that we would like to address, but we also are interested in hearing from you about connecting from the plaza to this existing beach and the importance that people put on that. It seems important to us, given the previous poll that indicated that there is an interest in launching at least certain kinds of human-powered watercraft like kayaks and stand-up paddleboards from a beach. So those are the main things I wanted to cover. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
So we don't have any new questions in the chat yet, but where you just left off touches back to a question that we had earlier that we were holding off on, related to ADA kayak and canoe launch. So can you speak to a little bit more about, the possibilities of, launching human-powered crafts?
Certainly, and that would be either from a dock or from a beach.
Yeah, it sounds like both, although I know there was some discussion about interest in launching from the beach in particular.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things that we would like to hear as a polling question is, we often, when I've worked on projects like this, we bring a permanent year-round access to the upper edge of the beach and end it, where the beach begins. And there's an opportunity when you do that to add something seasonally in the form of a mat that would extend down, into the water, or the rest of the width of the beach to the edge of the water, so that it would facilitate, more disabled access than just, ending at the upper edge. Another option that I did on one project is to actually extend a paved ramp, into the water across the beach on one side. It shouldn't be in the middle, but that would be like a year-round improvement if that kind of use was, a high priority. In terms of docks, I'll show you in the next part of this a project we worked on at Maidenbower Bay Park, which finished last year. We actually provided a place to launch kayaks from a dock, and it's a manufactured unit that has a ramp, kind of, there's like two fingers real close together with a ramp in between and grab rails to kind of launch a kayak from a dock for people with disabilities. So that's kind of a more full service kind of dock. I've also seen, and we used at the North Shore Recreation Area, just on a dock, just a series of kind of boxes at different heights that get you from your wheelchair down to the level of the, the gunwale of your boat. So those are some different considerations for getting to and from boats. I hope that answers the question.
This is Ann Cruz. I've got a different sort of comment and question. Is this the right time, or did you finish that last question?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. So I'm interested, I'm in the Seattle Sea Kayak Club, and I'm interested in the that drawing that you showed showing the ramp or the walkway improvements. And when
this one,
a kayak, going down a stairway isn't very easy. So using that zigzag route would be actually it's the other one, not that drawing, but the drawing of the improvements that you're proposing. Yeah,
this
that one. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not proposing this as part of this project. This is something that the city worked with another architect on who did the boiler building, and this is the city's kind of long-range plan for getting people from the main entrance to the park down to the plaza and the dock area.
Okay, well, I just wanted to comment that the tightness of those angles on the zigzag part would make it difficult for transporting kayaks, because kayaks don't. So anyway, so I'll just comment on that.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Then we have another question. Are there grants for ADA trails, launch pads for ADA? I recall the ADA trail was one of the most expensive elements in the boiler building project.
Well, here's the way I've worked with a lot of these state grants, including the ones that Paul indicated earlier in terms of funding, like ALEA and boating grants. Basically, if you get those grants, the state, and they come from the state of Washington, they require that you provide ADA access as part of any public access improvements that the funds are being used for. So I don't know of any, maybe Paul, you do, that are specifically grants only for ADA access, but essentially the RCO ones, if they're used for any new park and recreation improvements that involve public access, those improvements have to be ADA accessible. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I don't know of any that are specific to ADA accessibility, but everything you said is what I know too.
Yeah.
Great. There's another question in the chat now related to beach versus dock ADA launch, asking if it has to be one versus the other, or could it be both? Could we have a beach access for ADA as well as a dock access?
Theoretically, you could have both. I think it would be, it would be helpful for us to maybe investigate a little bit more with groups, say for Outdoors for All, if their mission is to help with, outdoor recreation be ADA accessible, where the most benefit is in terms of where that money's invested. So that's, I think, the best way I can answer that question. Theoretically, you could do both, but the budget may require that the city at least initially choose, the one that's most beneficial.
Okay. And another question, can you speak upon any surface improvements for the current walkways from the entrance down to the docks? I know there was a comment earlier about sort of grade and zigzag being difficult, but it's also surface type is as important as slope. So just wondering, you know, any comments about surface improvements to get down to the docks?
Okay. And that's from, I'm assuming that is referring to this type of solution from the main entrance to the park down to the docks. And my understanding is these surfaces would be concrete. And correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but certainly all the stairs and paths would be, and it looks like everything, to me, it's configured to be concrete, and that you basically can build the concrete with a textured surface that is slip resistant, and to make it ADA accessible, the cross slope can't be more than 2%, so very flat surfaces. So that's my understanding of how this would be configured.
I'll just add to that the current ADA access to the North Shoreline Trail, which is further north from this site, is a crushed gravel trail. It's a 1/4 inch minus crushed gravel. So when it's maintained, it provides a firm, stable surface, but it has still got a higher rolling resistance than a paved surface. So there is, I think Tim's comment is valid, that not all ADA surfaces are created equal, that crushed gravel surfaces has some advantages, but it is not equal to concrete or asphalt.
So that would be this path extending.
Path, yeah. If you follow that path north, there is a set of switchbacks that go up to the parking lot level.
Okay.
Just a couple of comments related to paved ramps. Again, kind of mentioning that for kayakers who might be walking from the parking lot, the ramps can get slippery or moss covered over time. And then another question, is it possible to provide ADA access to the beach area north of the plaza and still maintain the shoreline protection features that are in place?
I'm going to go to a different view here. So I think this shows in this area here kind of how we have a slope behind the beach between this current crushed surface that Paul was just talking about, and then so the beach is here, the plaza is kind of raised up above, and so what I'm kind of envisioning is you would need a new route that extends from sort of where the plaza, just west of where the plaza is, sort of at a ADA compliant slope, down to this beach. And so maybe you could repeat the rest of the question.
Yeah. So the full question, is it possible to provide ADA access to the beach and still maintain the shoreline protection features?
I would say yes, it is. So
I think does that refer to the log, shoring, and I'm not sure what there's several things there, but I imagine the log shoring is one of them.
Yeah, I think those logs, some of the logs may need to be repositioned. I think, the main thing that's keeping this beach here is the gravel material itself that was placed there. We do a lot of beach projects, and we've done a couple, here and at Calkins Landing for Mercer Island, and you know, the logs are basically there as a nearshore habitat improvement, and they can be repositioned. They're not the main thing that's holding the beach there. It's the gravel itself. And additionally, you know, the bank behind it, that would have to be, we would have to design the path so that it didn't destabilize this bank, but that's very feasible. I think we might need to build some walls and that kind of thing if necessary, but they wouldn't be very high. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. So we've got a few more questions. I'm going to skip over to kind of group these together on the topics that we're already discussing. So one question, has anyone actually analyzed the volume of kayaking and paddleboarding use and its potential impacts on other uses and ADA access? Just wondering how, you know, I think it sounds like how prevalent the use of kayak and paddleboard launching is and how that might impact existing access.
I'm not aware of any data, but maybe Paul, you have some about use numbers by boating type.
Well, I think I would say anecdotally that there's not a lot of people carrying their craft down from the parking lot right now, and I'm not sure how much that will change. But we are anticipating here is that there's a lot of demand for the camps and classes and potentially rentals that we anticipate having when we have a more active boating program, which would require an ADA component to be, you know, accessible. And so you know, that route still does require coming off the plaza onto a beach or coming off the plaza onto a dock for those watercraft. And we just know that our camps and classes are in high demand. They sell out when we do run them. We can't meet the demand right now. So we believe that that's a fairly large potential.
Yeah, and Paul, are rentals aside from classes or camps being contemplated here?
They are.
Okay.
They're contemplated in a future scenario, not currently.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. That actually touches on another question that was asked earlier.
Join the meeting.
Regarding whether most human-powered craft are personal and coming from off-site, or most users will be renting on-site. So it sounds like we're anticipating opportunity with camps and classes, and then down the road, potentially rentals at the site as well, although not currently offered. See, another question related to ADA access specifically to the lake. Is there a better place to access the lake for ADA than the current dock area? Talking about accessing from the upper level of the park down to the water.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the one other location that you know, that we've worked with the city on at the park is, it's not really closer to the parking lot, but it, you know, there's another small beach at the very north end at Calkins Point. So there's not the grade issues there. But there are the distance issues. So it's at the north facing side of Luther Burbank Park.
And we also have a potential for kayaks and other paddlecraft to launch at the swim beach to the south. There is the south parking lot, and the grade between the south parking lot and the swim beach is actually quite good. It's about a 300-foot or or 400-foot carry, which is not small, but it's doable. The problem is we need to reconfigure the beach in order to separate uses between the beach and boat launching there. So there's a whole, to make that happen, there's a whole capital project involved in reconfiguring the beach, which is in the capital project list, but it's a low priority. So that is not, it could happen, but it's not imminent in any future scenario.
This is Ann Cruz again, Seattle Sea Kayak Club. I want to point out one thing to keep in mind when comparing kayak use, personal kayak use with the other uses on the site. There might not be much of a conflict because a lot of the personal kayak use will be not during the summer. I personally never go out on Lake Washington during the summer because of the heavy boat traffic. And so I use, to the extent that I use Mercer Island at all, it's in the spring or fall or winter. And those are the times when I assume that you're probably not having the classes and the rentals and such. So improving the access for personal kayak use might be a possibility for spreading out the use over the full year. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And there are just a couple other comments in the chat right now. One kayaker, I love low floating docks, like 5 to 6 feet, and prefer that to shore access if available. Would hope ADA access to a floating dock would be preferable as well. And then another comment, in my experience, users with mobility impairments would use accessible access to docks for kayaks and stand-up paddleboards more than a beach.
Okay, very good. Was that first comment you read, was that 5 to 6 inches or 5 to 6 feet?
5 to 6 inches, excuse me.
So that's a very low freeboard dock like the rowing person described.
And I'm not seeing anything else come through the chat right now if we want to open it up again, Paul.
Yeah, I would say this is a good, we've gone through questions and we're getting comments now, so let's keep the conversation going with comments, whoever has them. This is the time to come forward. Okay, we're not.
See, he's not frozen. Wait.
All right. I'm not hearing a lot more comments and conversation.
Don Cohen has his hand up.
Yes, I didn't hear, I heard what Paul said about the use for small craft for classes and everything, and I understand that and applaud that, but I haven't heard a very compelling use of kayakers coming from the parking lot, the north parking lot, and walking down to launch down below. So I just wonder whether that really is a very important consideration and in figuring out the zigzag issue or the material or the slope of the stairway and stuff like that. I understand that there are ADA requirements, but ADA requirements don't require, I assume, that you have to be able to bring your own kayak down there, but I don't know for sure.
Well, the ADA requirements really aren't going to, I mean, they're going to address pedestrian use of any kind. I'm trying to remember, Paul, if you have a polling question on, do people envision the predominant sort of origin being from the water, from the land? Was that going to be a question?
We don't have that question.
Okay. But I think there were some comments that were indicating that, like one of the earlier ones, that from a kayaker, that they were interested in that route that I showed here, that be conducive to bringing your kayak from the parking lot down this zigzag route. So there seems to be some interest in that.
Yeah, could I comment on that again? And specifically following up on Don's comment. Right now, the access from the parking lot to the beach is virtually impossible to maneuver. So naturally, there's going to be very little activity of people taking their personal kayaks. If the goal is to increase the use of all types of small watercraft, then to increase the use of personal kayaks would require some specific type of improvements. If that's not the goal, if the goal is something different, then of course you would make the decision based on what the goals are.
And then Don Charrette has his hand up.
So I'm a activity provider. I'm a summer camp provider of the very full paddling camps there. So I can just speak anecdotally if anybody wants about the use of private craft there, at least during the weekdays. I understand that that's, a lot of people have weekends free, but I would say on average last summer, there were between 25 and 30 daytime uses any given week. So 4 or 5 a day, and usually in the afternoons, and usually of some sort of paddleboard of folks coming down. But there was definitely I would say a low but steady flow midweek. I would anticipate higher weekend use of private craft, as well as if there was better access, that number would probably increase as well.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
And I see that we have a comment from Tim. Sarah, did you read this comment from Tim already?
Yes, yes, we did.
Right, you did.
Yep.
Good.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and this conversation is making me think that maybe we do need to consider the kayak access for personal watercraft, that the access from the south parking lot for that purpose may be something we look at more closely as an alternative to this, because what's showing right now on Peter's slide for the boiler building will not be built in the time frame of the docks project. It will be built sometime in the future, and we don't know when that is. It's a fairly expensive, as another commenter made, it's a fairly expensive development. So in the interim, the access from the south parking lot is the more cost-effective way to get personal watercraft to the water. All right, so it sounds like we're wrapping up on this topic. It's 7:20. I am going to, unless there's another comment coming in, I'm going to consider launching our next poll. Anybody want to speak up before I do so?
I have another comment. Suspect rental from the boiler building craft would be very popular for the general public of able-bodied people. South access for ADA makes more sense.
There's also another comment in the group chat supporting a closer look at the south parking lot for kayak access.
I had a question about a comment. I don't know his full name, but Scherzo, I apologize for the mispronunciation, brought up over the break. Is that going to get dealt with now, or is that a later question, Sarah?
Paul created an additional poll at the end
Okay.
where we'll be able to chat about that.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks, Don.
All right. Good discussion. I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll. It's just 2 questions. Oh, no, it's 3 questions. And they're subjective, of course, but we want your opinion. So let's do this. It should take 3 or 4 minutes. So go ahead and look at this poll and answer the question. There are 3 questions. All right, we have 9 responses so far. I'll give it another 30 seconds.
There's a clarifying question that's been asked. How important to whom? To me or in general? Not sure what you want to know.
I think it's a good question. I think we'd like you to look beyond your own personal interest to look at what's best for the community, or what's best for everyone. All right, I'm going to close this poll and share the results. And I realized we didn't poll about the about dock access for kayaks, which would have been a good idea given the discussion.
Yeah, I think you had it in your previous poll though, under the docks.
Did I? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So we got somewhat important leading on the access route from the north end of the plaza to the gravel beach. Somewhat important is leading on that. The continuous path from the shoreline trails is very important by majority. And we're pretty split on what lake level we should be shooting for, but it looks like it's more access is the trend. So that's interesting.
Yeah, those are a little bit kind of saying opposite things. Those because late spring through summer is the high water level, and so the year round would be include winter, which is the lowest. So
Yeah, Don is making a comment. The lake level question was tough because we really hadn't directly discussed it, and I didn't fully understand it. That may explain the split results.
I think what I was trying to say earlier when I was talking about the beach and access to it is you could have ADA access come to the high water line and have permanent year-round improvements kind of get you to the high water edge of the beach and kind of a flat, landing area there. And you could have seasonal mats that it could provide access, seasonally, like during the summer or other high use times that you can kind of roll up or roll out. The other part of this question is, would you have a ramp that continued down the beach to the low water level? and so, there's a 2-foot fluctuation in the lake seasonally. But the beach has a fairly gentle grade, so the length of that ramp across the beach, it could be a difference of 15 or 20 feet further if you tried to get it all the way to the low water level.
And Anne is asking, what do you mean by seasonal mats? Can you give a little more information about what those mats?
Essentially these are just like sort of a rubberized kind of material that you can roll up, and you're just laying it over the sand, and it's more non-yielding than just having sand out there, and they're made for the purpose of providing disabled access on beaches. And you don't see them a lot in this area, but you see them in other parts of the country where there's really wide sandy beaches, and some parks departments or private owners will provide those for people with limited mobility seasonally.
We've got another question. Does access from the South Beach negate the need to have ADA access at the dock? It may, if it provides less cost and is more logical, does it make sense to explore that option instead?
Well, I think what Paul mentioned was ADA access for, people coming to the park to launch their personal watercraft. And does it make more sense to do that at the South Beach? It sounds like cost and timing wise, that would be feasible sooner for personal watercraft like kayaks or stand-up paddleboards launching from a beach than at this location. In terms of making docks accessible, I think that's a different question because the response we got from the earlier poll was people would like to have, you know, ADA access to a beach for launching and ADA access to docks for various kinds of boating. So I think those both, there's interest in both is what I was hearing. Does that sound right, Paul, from the earlier poll?
I think being able to launch individual watercraft doesn't let us off the hook for providing ADA access for people who want to participate in programs like camps, classes, rentals. So there's two different functions there, both which would have some ADA requirement, I believe. This is a tough one because it's hard to do it all.
Yeah.
But we need to make a concerted effort to do what we can do. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that. Any other discussion on access? All right. I'm not hearing anything. Just go to mine. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us for this long. I know it's a long meeting, but really appreciate all of your input. We got one more topic to cover, and then we'll start to bring it all together.
So let me bring up my other presentation here.
Yes.
Okay. And okay. All right. So this is the last topic, and I would say it is an important topic, but a more amorphous topic than the others, and it's also more future oriented in that it really largely
Eric Gordon
joined the meeting.
You know, largely is about how the plaza and boiler building and docks kind of come together, and you know what kinds of things can be done to make the whole facility, you know, an expression of what the community values and is special. And as Paul said at the beginning, the Luther Burbank Master Plan, which I did work on, I'm part of that team years ago in 2006, identified this area, you know, for the uses that we're talking about. And this discussion is more focused on the plaza as a kind of a gathering space that has, you know, boating uses and other park uses that, you know, anybody can take advantage of. And I'm listing here kind of 6 elements, and we'll have some polling at the end that has a few more that are part of, you know, how you create that gathering space. And so that's what we'll be talking about in this part. Because the word placemaking, you know, landscape architects love this word, and they love creating a quote unquote sense of place. So we put in a couple of definitions that I think are helpful, and I'll read these. The first one is from Wikipedia, and it says, placemaking capitalizes on a local community's assets, inspiration, and potential with the intention of creating public spaces that promote people's health, happiness, and well-being. And the second one from the Project for Public Spaces says, placemaking inspires people to collectively reimagine and reinvent public spaces and social identities that define a place and support its ongoing evolution. And I think one thing that's really striking about both of these in light of tonight's meeting is that they do focus on kind of the community and the context of where a site is and what's important to the people who will be using it as an expression of how you make it a unique place and create a sense of place that's appropriate. The photos show a couple projects I worked on. The first one, the Arboretum Shoreline Trail, we worked on with KPFF to build that bridge and some little mini beaches that are used for launching and landing canoes on the waterfront canoe route through there. That includes rental canoes from the UW Activity Center. And the lower one, the Olympic Sculpture Park, I worked on this beach, this public access beach, which is really the only beach, in the downtown waterfront that's publicly accessible. So just a couple things about this project site with regard to this topic is, it's got a lot of really great things going for it. Its location within the park overall and the shoreline, is very kind of central to other park facilities and uses. And as you go from north to south along the park, it's kind of in a nice central location. But also the fact that it has this building that's very iconic. It has the plaza, it's already there. And it has the docks and the beach. All those things together in one place is a real advantage and a real great and special opportunity for the people of Mercer Island and anyone that comes to use this park. So the building itself, as I said, and Paul said, it's in the city's plans to renovate it. It's not part of this project, but it's just visually as a giving this a sense of place. It's really kind of the dominant feature, partly because of this big smokestack, but these the tall windows, and once this is all done, it's going to be just a fantastic facility. The other things about it that it already has are, there is some lighting there. There's public art along the edge of the plaza with the handsome bollards. So these are other, elements of making a unique and special place. So there really aren't a lot of constraints around this issue. The only one that I could come up with is that these handsome bollards along the edge of the plaza, kind of right in these orange dots here, they were really created as public art, and the building code requires when you have a drop off over 30 inches that's vertical like this, that you have some kind of fall prevention and that's, meets certain building code standards. So it doesn't mean that those couldn't remain, but, long term, when the plaza is renovated, there may need to be something added on the water side of those to kind of prevent, children or others from falling in off the plaza. Other than that, there's just a lot of great opportunities in terms of the boiler building renovation, and the restrooms for the use of programs and just general public use. The paving on the site is a way to kind of unify it and you know, provide an opportunity for expression. These two viewpoints on the north and south end are great features, and the views are spectacular from this location. And the, you know, another opportunity on both the north and the south side is to create some more sense of an entry point, you know, as you come into this space, that you're, you know, you're entering a special part of the park. And, you know, really the docks themselves, as they're being rebuilt and reconfigured, you know, there's other opportunities there for, you know, public art or other, the railings, how those are designed to provide a sense of placemaking. So a couple of examples of projects that show, I think, kind of two good bookends for this. One is the North Shore Recreation Area, again, that we worked on with KPFF at Magnuson Park in Seattle. And this was built in two phases in 2006 and 2009. It's, you know, it's a pretty, I would say, you know, it's a former military base and naval air station. It's pretty bare bones in terms of, you know, it's really just the functional facilities for launching and retrieving different kinds of watercraft and storing them and having teaching, learning programs on site. Another example is this brand new Maidenbower Bay Park in Bellevue, which we designed and was built last year and has non-motorized boating facilities and an existing public marina. So similar facilities to Luther Burbank, but you know, this project is really Bellevue's attempt to reconnect their downtown with the waterfront of Lake Washington. It's a very grand gesture. It had a very large budget. It was 30 years in the making. And I think that, you know, what we're looking at here at Luther Burbank is something in between these two for kind of placemaking and this gathering space. So I think, you know, we're interested in people's feedback. There were some questions about lighting, but just to get everyone thinking about this in terms of, you know, what aspects of this topic are of interest to people. Is it the paving? Is it public art? Is it architecture? Is it the lighting for pedestrian use? Is it other aspects of landscape design like plantings or site furnishings, or is it preserving the views or creating more of a sense of entry, or is it something else that I haven't even talked about? So those are the main things I wanted to cover on this. Thank you.
All right, we can take questions.
Yeah, no questions yet. We have a comment about favoring natural plantings, not more grass, and preserving views. So there's a couple opportunities there.
And maybe one other thing I'll just emphasize again is that, you know, we're really looking for feedback on sort of what kind of approach the city would take to shape a future project, and, you know, rebuilding and redesigning this plaza is a future activity beyond this dock project to implement.
Right. Yeah, we should say that the goal is not to design this, but to figure out some pre-designed visionary kind of like,
right.
Yeah. You know, what would the feeling be? What would the experience be? Or, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And that could help the city with, with grant funding, you know, for the funders to see, oh, you know, the city's thought about this beyond just rebuilding the docks themselves, but they've envisioned this whole, you know, gathering place, public space aspect of the project longer term and how it all fits together.
Yeah, I'll say the ALEA grants specifically, they like to see a holistic approach to the waterfront access. They don't want to see, oh, we just want to put in an ADA ramp. They want to see, like, you're thinking about the whole public and how everything fits together.
So again, a couple more comments. I think connectivity is very important. Has there been any consideration of putting large stairs or seating where people can sit beyond where the bollards are to picnic, sit, enjoy the view, not beach access or swimming access? It says there's something like this on the southwest side of South Lake Union.
I would say, you know, we're early in this process, and we're really looking for, you know, any kind of feedback like that to kind of take forward and, you know, integrate into a, like Paul said, a kind of a vision for this plaza.
I will say on Don Charrette's comment that a part of the boiler building renovation is to create an outdoor classroom on top of the restroom annex, which would put you up higher than the plaza and give you a view over the plaza out to the water. It would be like a balcony or kind of overlook for the area, and so that has an interesting potential for what Don is. It could be like a place for people to sit and look out and take in the greater activity of the dock.
Yeah. And there's something very similar to that in the foreground here. This is also the top of a restroom lifeguard building at Maidenbower that's also a public viewing deck. So I think that's a great idea, and it sounds like your architects were thinking about that, sort of not on top of the roof of the boiler building, but for the restrooms just to the south.
That's right.
And we've got another kind of high-level visionary comment. Design should invite non-boaters, should have year-round appeal, and all-weather access and appeal. And some additional support for these comments. It sounds like one participant was thinking about this when we were talking about lighting on the docks and breakwaters for pedestrians, just the opportunity to stroll on the docks, creating that ambiance.
Okay. Right.
Path and plaza lighting to invite walkers and runners on a loop that they can use year round and in the dark, like around Green Lake.
Okay.
Those are all good comments.
Yeah, great.
We're not getting a ton more questions in the chat, so I don't know if you want Paul to just open it up for also people to raise their hands and comment.
That sounds great. You can raise your hand, or probably at this point, I think we're doing pretty well with just speaking up. I don't.
Hey, Paul, this is Rory. I have my hand raised. Those are all great ideas, the ones that were put in the chat. I think we would really be missing an opportunity if recognizing that the design for the plaza space is beyond the scope of the dock project, but we would be truly missing an opportunity if we didn't try to integrate the thinking behind those two projects as much as possible. And depending on which one gets executed first is lead the way toward the development of the other. To me, I think the plaza area is kind of, it's a pretty tight area, and we may be asking a lot of it functionally given the amount of space. But to me, it could be so much lighter, so much more inviting. I could just see the bustle of, you know, boats coming and going out of the boiler building for rental and use, and you know, who knows, maybe a food stand and or something down there that would operate seasonally. But just to create an environment, nautical flags, whatever, an environment that would draw people down there, emphasize the connection to the lake, to the dock, to what's going on there, and all the water-based activity.
Yeah.
You're somewhat limited in terms of textures and colors by the fact that you're dealing with a large red brick building, but that has its attributes.
Yeah.
And you could capitalize on those, I think.
Yeah, those are great comments. Yeah, really appreciate that. I mean, I think what comes to mind with what you're talking about is, you know, we talked about this also in terms of plaza activation, that, you know, once you build this dock project, and you eventually, you know, when that building's renovated, and, you know, once you have all those activities going on, there's going to be more people and more activity there. And so, you know, just providing a setting for that's both appropriate, but also, you know, it again expresses what's important to the community, like you say, expresses the connection of this space to the water, whether you're using the water or not. When people get there, they should know, oh, this place is about, you know, boating in the water and, you know, all of that. So I think those are great comments.
There's also another comment in the chat just supporting kind of the efficient use of space with, you know, the classroom or other gathering space on the roof of a restroom or rental complex. So sounds like there's interest in that kind of efficient use of space.
Okay, great.
Any other comments? I see a hand raised from Suzanne.
So we've never had a location for our historical society archives and whatever sorts of things they have. And I just wonder if we could touch base with them and see if there is, as far as that building goes, sort of, I don't have a better word, but decorating it, but, you know, maybe finding a home for some of our, you know, history, island history.
Sounds like you're thinking maybe displaying it is what you're suggesting. Yeah. Okay.
There's a question from Lynn. Rory mentioned some sort of food stand down there. Is that possible seasonally? So there is the potential that's fairly easy to do is that there is a concession stand down there next to the restrooms that was built as a concession stand back in the 70s. And if we have a concessionaire in there doing camps and rentals, that concession stand could be activated for the rentals and, you know, the retail end of that, which could involve some, you know, limited food purchasing. I'm not sure how much, I'm not sure anything more than prepackaged or easy to dispense kinds of food would be possible there. And something bigger is not really in the cards. I mean, it starts to go beyond the master plan's vision, but it's not. It's the master plan is not really doesn't really say anything specifically about that. So I don't want to get too far ahead of that. I just know that the restaurant concept of the full service restaurant down there, that was discussed a lot. As we actually have some studies, market studies about that, and that was, there was at the end of the whole process, there was no consensus to include that in the master plan.
Yeah. Do you think that any kind of small food cart or something mobile or even a small food truck is a possibility there? Or
it is a possibility. We've actually talked to, this is not particular to the waterfront, but we've talked to a food truck broker. There's actually this guy who brokers food trucks. We talked to him about locating the food truck at Burbank Park in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And so he knows the market. I mean, and he declined that because he said there wasn't enough traffic in the Burbank parking lot, which surprises us because when we go there on the weekends, it's hopping. But he says it's got to have. It's got to be really packed. It's got to be like summer celebration packed with people to be worthwhile.
Okay.
Then we have another comment / question. Would people-powered water sports overpower boats, jet skis, etc.? Wonder how the new docks will change uses here.
I don't know if that's, if I'm the best one to answer that or if Andy is. It seems, I guess all I'll say is it seems like there's a mix that's intended in the programming of the types of docks. And so, that's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think they're the way the RCO grants work is the different grants fund different types of uses. And the picture that Paul painted early on this evening was using a combination of grants to maximize the productivity of the site. And one of those grant sources is for motorboats less than 26 feet. And so, and I believe we actually, the city already has some funding from that particular program. So I think we're headed in the direction of a mix of uses. And our goal will be to find the right balance and develop the facility in a way that the multiple uses can be, can occur simultaneously and safely. It doesn't sound yet that there's a desire or a direction to really prioritize hand-powered craft and keep the motorboats away entirely. But it's clear that there is a strong desire for improvements to the human-powered craft and the smaller boats than what's there now, and so that's what we'll try to do. But I don't think it's going to be all one or all the other. I don't know if Paul, if you want to add anything else on the issue of funding and how that all comes together.
Can I speak to that a little bit, if that's all right?
Yeah, go for it.
So again, this is sort of a weekday, daytime, summer experience that I'm speaking from. We didn't run anything on the weekends last year. Paddle power, both from sort of commercial camps like ourselves as well as individual users, didn't seem to have very much impact or really interaction with boaters. Bigger motorboats come from offshore, come to the dock. They don't spend time along the shore. And on the docks, we were using very discrete, separate parts of the dock. The users that I think would interact more with power boaters would be picnickers, fisher folks, and sunbathers that just sort of spread out on the dock, and they might be, they're not indiscriminate users, but they take wherever it's sunny and there's less people. So they would probably share space more than canoeist, kayak, stand-up paddleboard, rowing, etc.
Good point. Thank you.
See, Don Cohen. Good.
The obvious problem is that when you park a 35-foot cabin cruiser on the north side of the north dock, you've eliminated 90% of the use of that dock for more passive uses. I realize it doesn't happen all the time, but I feel the strains of trying to accommodate various interests. You know, and I speak sort of like Suzanne Scone. I speak not necessarily for the active motorized users of this area.
All right, I'm getting that in the notes.
Okay, we're at 8 o'clock. This is going great. I'd like to see if there's any more comments. We've got a little poll here. Not the last one, but getting close.
Second to the last.
This one's just got one question. So, anybody got anything else? We'll have discussion after the poll. So let's go ahead and launch the poll and see where people stand. And then we'll wrap this topic up. Okay, give it another 30 seconds here. Anybody else? Going. All right, here we go. We're gonna end the polling and share the results. So it looks like site furnishings has a lot of support. And views. And there's some other topics. I think architecture probably wasn't a lot of clarity about what that was. So maybe that's why it didn't get votes. We don't know.
And maybe because it's clearly not directly part of this project. So, yeah. And it's already there.
Yeah. Okay, great. So any further discussion? This is the time to talk about the placemaking. Anything else? Any reactions to the poll you have? And we'll move into the last topic if there is none. Don Cohen.
Just one blasphemy type of comment. Maybe the architecture result is that there probably are some people like me who aren't as wedded to the retention of the structure down there. I realize that that's part of the, plan and all that, but like, I don't personally feel strongly about that. And that's why I did put down architecture as a major issue.
Okay, stop sharing those results.
Okay, I'm gonna close that out.
Right now, we're going to talk about criteria for evaluating all these different options here. And that's Andy. He's got a slide or two on that.
Okay, so this is just briefly. We've gotten a lot of good input on the design elements and the features and things to consider. So the next steps on this are to develop a couple of different alternatives and look at the different ways we can achieve some of these goals. And one of the important things is that as we evaluate the criteria, we understand, or we evaluate the alternatives, we understand the criteria that were being used and that the criteria are being applied in the same way to all of the alternatives. And so, what we're looking for here is, some feedback on what criteria should we use. Obviously, safety is going to be very important, and we've heard a lot about trying to keep the motorboats and those activities away from the hand-powered craft and small boats. Cost is clearly a criteria. We don't have an unlimited budget. The environmental impacts we'll have to look at, and they also will affect the permitting and the timeline for that. So that's something we'll look at. Alignment with grant criteria. This ties back to cost. If we're going to be going after grants, we need to make sure that the components in the design of the park will score well when we submit the grant application. If it doesn't, align with those criteria, somebody else is going to get that money. We'll also look at some opportunity, whether or not it provides an opportunity for generating revenue by supporting camps or by supporting some small concession or facility rental. I don't know what that is, but we'll consider the opportunities for revenue generation. We'll evaluate how well an alternative provides access from the parking lot and from the shore and from the upland areas, as well as does it improve access to the facility, to the park, for people coming by water. We also, part of what we want to do is balance that and make sure we get the priorities right. And so those are, the initial set of criteria that we came up with. And then, what we'd like to hear is from you is what else should we consider when we're comparing alternatives A, B, C, and D against each other to pick the right one or to pick and choose the right pieces. So we end up with a design that, you said, I think I said this earlier, it's not going to, necessarily.
So I'll pop in. This is Suzanne.
Yeah.
I would say, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say water safety educational opportunities for youth that live on an island.
Okay. Good point.
And it's also just a youth mental and physical health issue, So I think, having access to the lake, we have 27,000 people here. There's only a few waterfront homes, relatively speaking. So I think access, for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I see Don has a comment. I would add as a criterion consistency with community vision. Don, that's more than the master plan then? Is there other community vision that you think bears on this?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, well, I was hearkening back to those photographs of the Arboretum, and it's similar to what Suzanne just said, kind of the sense of place, calmness, et cetera, that it shouldn't all be, it shouldn't all be revenue generation and water access oriented. I realize those need to be taken into account. So you have the master plan memorized a lot more than I do. So if that's included, then the answer is yes.
Yeah, we are keeping in mind what the master plan called for, and all the work that was done there is certainly part of the some of the factors that we consider as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and you guys know this better than I do, the world has changed since the master plan, and calmness, opportunities for youth, and whoever it is may have greater impact today than they did, a year or two ago. But I don't have to preach to the choir.
I want to also just say, I don't know where this fits into criteria, but I'm speaking now. Peter Struck, who is a member of the Parks and Rec Commission, a new member. He couldn't not be here tonight, but he made a couple of comments that I thought were interesting to consider, and they were about social distancing. And we don't know where this epidemic is going, but he said that we should be considering the possible need for social distancing in our design criteria. I don't know.
This is Rory. I would throw in as possible design criteria flexibility to accommodate a variety of uses. Looking at the design, I'm not sure whether that the access here is addressing just all users or accessibility, but certainly accessibility and improving accessibility needs to be a paramount concern.
So this is Ann Cruz, and I was thinking about a comment very similar to what you just mentioned about social distancing. It seems like a lot of the ideas would have the effect, a lot of the ideas that we've talked about would have the effect of crowding everyone into a very small space. And another value different from that would be to spread people out. Apart from the COVID related purposes, just spreading people out in more space and spreading people out time-wise would be a different approach to take.
Other comments on evaluation criteria? I see Joe has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think from DNR's perspective, this project meets so many elements of what our statute asks us to do: public access to the water, protecting the environment. One thing I just want to point out is that we have a priority for public access, and I believe there's a case on your lease too. When we lease land that has complete public access, there's no rent, so it's a free public access rent. The discussions on concession stands and businesses and revenue, it's not that DNR precludes those uses, but there may be areas where the free public access doesn't apply, and there may be some rental charge for that. So just so you're aware of that when commercial uses start taking up areas that aren't open to the public 24 hours, 7 days a week, then we look and see where those areas are. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Joe. That I don't know if everybody could understand him. I don't know if Joe, if there's a problem with your microphone, but let me just restate what you said, which is that we have a no cost lease to the portions of our lease area that are public access, but we actually do pay rent on the boiler building footprint because it is not public access. And Joe is saying that things like concession stand would also be subject to rent if it was, it was not part of public access. So that's, the cost of using the land, the way we use the land could be a factor. Anything else? Anybody else? This is unrelated to the evaluation criteria, but we do have one last poll, which is just a general poll, 2 questions. So if there's no other comments on criteria, and I'll maybe explain just a little bit more about how the open house will go, so that'll come after this. But we'll go ahead and launch this poll, and we'll then look at the results and then talk about what comes next. Okay, we have 8 responses so far. 10. $11. I'll give it another 15 seconds. All right, going. We got 12 responses. All right, let's take a look. Got 2 questions here. One is this fairly complicated question of who should this primarily be for? And we have a 50% It's interesting. We have a 50%, half the people think they're all the users are equally important, but there's a split there. And then who do we have? Who are we talking to? We're talking to a lot of paddlers, a couple sailors, and one power boater, and three people who do not boat. All right. Interesting. Any reactions to that? Anybody want to make any comments? All right, I'm going to stop sharing that. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the next steps. As I said at the beginning, Peter and Andy and I have a meeting at 8:30 tomorrow morning to talk about this. And we're going to be talking about the next step, which is developing concept alternatives. And those will be packages of ideas that come out of this design charrette that will be probably visual graphics based. And those will be presented to the public last week of August, most likely. I haven't confirmed that with Peter or Andy, but and they'll be both online as things to view online, and also they'll be up at the site. We'll actually put up posters at the site for people to view when they come down to use the docks. So there'll be two ways to look at them, and then there'll be a poll of some sort, not a doodle, Survey Monkey poll, asking questions about
join the meeting
preferences. So that's the next step we're anticipating, and there will be that will be a significant opportunity. We'll do as much as we can to get participation, but everybody on this call or on this design charrette would be welcome to start spreading the word that that's coming. The more participation we get there, the better. And you all know people who use Luther Burbank Park, or who have boats, or who like public spaces or whatever. You know those people. They may want to participate and they don't know it. So let them know between now and the end of August. And like I was saying, if all goes well, we'll be bringing this to the Parks and Rec Commission sometime in the fall. Any questions here? Don.
I just wanted to thank you, everybody who was responsible for putting this together. I thought it went very well after I was able to connect. You may or may not have seen my 8-year-old grandsons looking at this. It was a great educational experience to them, but they helped me think through some of these things. So there's information to be gleaned from a whole range of types of people, and I know that's part of your aim.
Yes, thank you. That's actually this is a brilliant opportunity for family engagement. You know, a family could walk down to the park, look at the posters, actually walk around the docks and take it all in and give us some very useful information. That's Don, I love that idea that we could really pitch this to families and, you know, and people of all ages, not just you know, the people who are at this meeting.
Well, I think it was consistent with something Suzanne said about using the whole thing as a educational kind of opportunity, you know, at all levels. So.
Paul, I have a logistical question. So there's going to be the ideas are going to be available the last week in August. If I learn of somebody who's interested in getting involved in this, should they use that as the point at which they get involved, or should they get involved before that sequence?
They should get involved before that. They should go to the Let's Talk project page. That's letstalk.mercergov.org. They should go to the Let's Talk Mercer Island project page. You can just Google Let's Talk Mercer Island and start to look at the materials and get up to speed on what's happened so far, so that when this comes out, they're like ready to hit the ground. I mean, that's the ideal scenario. And they could also start commenting on the Let's Talk page. They don't have to wait for this, for this next launch. The Let's Talk page is set up to be a dialogue among community members. So you can comment on other people's ideas. You can post your own ideas. It's a pretty powerful platform that we have the opportunity to use there.